there's a quiet phenomenon unfolding across the globe, largely unnoticed by mainstream society. Some of the most spiritually aware, deeply conscious, and psychologically evolved individuals are withdrawing not in protest, not with anger or disdain, but with calm intention. They're leaving social media, walking away from long-held careers, ending relationships that no longer align, and choosing solitude over noise. Carl Jung saw this coming. He referred to it as a necessary withdrawal, a moment when someone becomes so internally aware that existing in a world governed by unconscious behavior becomes not just uncomfortable, but unbearable. This isn't spiritual escapism or avoidance. Jung believed it was the psyche's built-in response to an overwhelming tide of collective unconsciousness. When you wake up, truly wake up, not just intellectually, but psychologically, you begin to sense the energetic weight of society. It's not just exhausting, it's painful, not metaphorically, but physically and emotionally painful. The systems, the conversations, the expectations, everything begins to feel like it was built for someone else. Someone still asleep. Jung described modern society as running on shared delusions, projections, false personas, collective shadows all functioning in unison to maintain a certain illusion of normalcy. These illusions aren't mistakes. They are the system. And the moment you become conscious of this, you become a disruptor. You see through the masks, the roles, the narratives. You notice the denial, the scapegoating, the unconscious reactions disguised as morality or truth. And here's the kicker. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's not arrogance, it's awareness. You become, as Jung put it, awake in a room full of people talking in their sleep. Every conversation starts to feel like a performance. Every interaction demands that you shrink. Every social engagement becomes an act of pretending you don't see what you see. This is the silent burden of consciousness, being surrounded, yet isolated, not physically, but psychologically. You operate on a different frequency, one that requires an immense amount of energy just to stay afloat in unconscious spaces. Jung said the more shadow you integrate within yourself, the more intolerable the collective shadow becomes. You've faced your own darkness, your fears, flaws, and failures. And so watching the world externalize its own darkness onto others becomes disorienting. You can no longer play along. You can no longer pick a side. You begin to see that both sides are just mirrors, projecting their unresolved pain. And so, the only viable choice becomes withdrawal, not to retreat in fear, but to protect what has been awakened. This kind of withdrawal isn't a rejection of humanity. It's a reclamation of self. Jung didn't see solitude as weakness. He saw it as a vital stage in individuation, the process of becoming a fully realized human being. When the external world no longer reflects your inner truth, the pull inward becomes a necessity, not an indulgence. You begin seeking spaces where authenticity isn't punished, where you can speak truth without walking on eggshells, where silence isn't awkward, but sacred, where depth isn't rare, but expected. Most of the time, those spaces exist not in institutions, not in cities or online, but in nature, in books, in creative expression, and in small, rare, soul-to-soul conversations that leave you feeling more alive rather than drained. And even then, the most profound moments often come when you're alone, not lonely alone. There's a difference. Loneliness is the absence of others. Aloneness is the presence of self. Jung emphasized that the self, the deepest core of your psyche, only fully emerges in silence, in solitude, in the places where distraction is no longer possible. When you stop trying to be seen, you begin to see. When you stop performing, you begin to feel. And when you stop consuming, you begin to create not for applause, but for alignment. You might notice a shift in your energy. Crowds exhaust you. Small talk feels intolerable. Social media becomes noise. You crave honesty, spaciousness, and meaning. It's not that you've become antisocial. It's that your soul is starving for realness. And there's so little of it left in places that used to feel alive. This is where Jung's concept of the Hermit archetype becomes relevant. He believed that every human being reaches a stage where external growth must be balanced with internal depth. You've climbed the ladder, played the game, gathered knowledge, and now the inner voice calls you to stillness, to refinement, to truth. But here's what makes this challenging. The world doesn't reward inner work. It doesn't see silence as strength. It doesn't measure the value of someone who chooses presence over productivity. So when you begin to disappear, it often looks like failure from the outside. Friends may ask, "Where did you go?" Society might say, "What happened to your ambition?" And you might doubt yourself, wondering if you've lost your edge. But Jung would say, you haven't lost your edge. You found your essence. You're not dropping out. You're dropping in, into yourself, into your body, into your truth. In this deeper layer of being, you realize that much of your former drive wasn't coming from truth, it was coming from conditioning. The need to succeed, to be relevant, to be heard, to be seen. These weren't always desires born from soul. Often, they were survival mechanisms, rooted in the fear of invisibility, of worthlessness, of not being enough. When you awaken spiritually, those layers begin to shed. What's left is something simpler, quieter, but infinitely more real. Jung spoke about the process of deintegration, a temporary falling apart that precedes genuine reintegration. It's a dismantling of the false self, and with it, the collapse of your old motivations. Now, you're not chasing identity. You're living from presence. You're not trying to stand out. You're trying to align. You're not proving anything. You're allowing everything. This is the shift that most people don't understand, because it can't be measured with metrics or achievements. It can only be felt deep in the nervous system, in the breath, in the silence between thoughts. You start making choices that look irrational to others. You leave the job that paid well but drained your soul. You cancel plans without guilt. You say no to things that once fed your ego because they no longer feed your spirit. You stop explaining yourself. You stop apologizing for needing space. You realize that disappearing isn't about running away. It's about coming back, coming home. And with this return comes grief. Jung was clear about this. When you release the roles you once played, there's a mourning period. You grieve the identities you outgrew, the friends who no longer resonate. The dreams you now see were rooted in insecurity. This grief isn't weakness, it's cleansing. It makes space. It prepares you for what's next. Because this isn't the end. It's a transition, a death of one life, and the quiet preparation for another. A life not built on conformity, but on consciousness, not on constant output, but on inner alignment. A life where your energy is no longer scattered, but sacred. Jung would say, this is the sacred withdrawal. A stepping back, not to vanish, but to see more clearly. And what you start to see in this space of solitude is that most people are terrified of the quiet. They don't want to face their shadow. They don't want to slow down because speed keeps them numb. But you're different now. You've tasted stillness, and even though it's uncomfortable at times, it's real, it's honest, it doesn't lie to you. So you keep disappearing, not because you hate the world, but because you're learning to love yourself in a way the world never taught you how. What you're experiencing now isn't isolation, it's initiation. You're not withdrawing from life. You're entering a deeper layer of it. Jung taught that the most meaningful transformations happen away from the crowd, in the wilderness of your own mind. And the wilderness isn't tidy. It doesn't come with clear instructions. It strips you of the narratives you've carried, the masks you've worn, and the roles you've played. It forces you to sit with what's underneath. And underneath is often stillness, silence, an emptiness that's not hollow, but spacious. It's a space waiting to be filled, not with noise or distractions, but with essence, with purpose, with something real. You begin to sense that this disappearance is less about retreat and more about alignment. It's not that you're pulling away from society because you've given up. You're pulling inward to reset, to remember who you are beneath the noise. In this retreat, your nervous system recalibrates. Your values reorient. You stop reacting and start observing. You notice how frantic the world has become, how addicted to urgency, how allergic to presence. And that presence you're cultivating, it's medicine, not just for you, but for those around you. Because when you emerge, and you'll carry a different energy, one that's not rushed, not reactive, not performative. It's rooted, grounded, awake. Jung described this phase as the return of the inner sage, the part of you that sees through illusion and speaks from soul. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't crave attention. It simply offers truth, not aggressively, not to convert anyone, but as a quiet flame that reminds others of their own inner fire. You begin to notice that you don't need to be everywhere anymore. You don't need to have an opinion on everything. You don't need to react to every headline, every trend, every emotional spike. Your peace matters more. Your clarity matters more. And most importantly, your integrity matters more. From this place, you may still engage with the world, but differently. You speak when you have something to say, not just to fill the void. You show up with intention, not out of obligation. You give only when you can give from fullness, not depletion. You're no longer driven by guilt. You're guided by resonance. And sometimes, that resonance will still call you back into solitude, not as a hiding place, but as home base, a place to return, recharge, and remember. Because now you understand something that few people do. True transformation doesn't happen in the spotlight. It happens in the shadows, in the stillness, in the quiet disappearance from everything that once defined you. This quiet disappearance is not a flaw in the awakened path, it's a feature. It's the soul's way of rebuilding from the inside out. Carl Jung wrote extensively about this stage of deep inner reformation, calling it the return to the self. It's the moment when your identity is no longer based on what you do, who approves of you, or how you compare to others. It's now shaped by a deeper, invisible truth. You begin to realize that disappearing doesn't mean disconnecting. It means reconnecting, just not with the noise of the world. You're reconnecting with your intuition, your body, your breath. You're learning to live in harmony with your natural pace, not society's tempo. Yours. In this new rhythm, your priorities shift. You start choosing nourishment over novelty, simplicity over spectacle, depth over drama. The things that once held so much appeal status, achievement, popularity begin to feel empty, not because you're bitter, but because you're full of awareness, full of presence, full of quiet truth. You notice the subtle way society tries to pull you back in. Post more, hustle more, argue more, prove more. But now you feel no need. There is no hunger for attention, no thirst for approval. You realize that real peace is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just is. Jung emphasized the courage it takes to live this way. It's not the easy path. You'll be misunderstood. People will project onto your silence. They'll assume disinterest, arrogance, even depression. But what they won't understand is that this silence is alive. It's healing. It's working in ways the external world can't measure. And perhaps the most powerful shift of all, you stop needing to be understood. You release the compulsion to explain your absence. You no longer chase recognition or permission. You honor your disappearance, not as failure, but as fidelity to your own soul. Because in this retreat, you're not losing yourself. You're shedding everything you're not. You are becoming whole, not for the world, but for yourself. And from that wholeness, when you do choose to return, you'll bring something the world is starving for. Quiet wisdom, grounded truth, the kind of presence that doesn't need to speak loudly to be felt deeply. Eventually, you realize that this disappearance isn't the end of your story. It's the pause before a more authentic chapter begins. You haven't exited life. You've entered it more deeply. You haven't abandoned your path. You've stopped following paths that weren't yours. And now, what rises in the quiet is purpose. Not the kind that's branded or broadcast, but the kind that comes from soul. You act not because you're driven, but because you're called. You re-engage with the world, not to be seen, but to serve not from depletion, but from overflow. This is the paradox Jung understood well. The deeper you go into solitude, the more profound your return becomes. The world may not notice your absence, but it will feel your presence calmer, clearer, more whole. So if you're disappearing, let yourself trust the silence, honor the retreat, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for the world is to come home to yourself first. And if this message speaks to you, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel so others on this quiet, courageous path might find the reflection they need.